Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for taking time out of your super busy days, especially right at the end of the school year where we know that you have concerts, you have auditions, you have grades, you have all of these things to do. Thank you for taking time to be here with us tonight for this webinar, which hopefully will help you with some of those end of the year tasks, such as streamlining your end of the year auditions. My name is Giovanna Cruz, and I am an education manager at Make Music. Prior to that, I was an orchestra teacher in Austin, Texas for 7 years. I'm a string player, a cellist. I have my DMA in performance. And what you're going to hear about today was actually my experience using SmartMusic to do this very thing, streamlining my end of year auditions. With us today as well is my colleague, my dear colleague, Lee Kalstad. You may be able to see him there on screen. So Lee, why don't you talk a little bit about yourself, and then we'll get started.
Well, my name's Lee. I taught for, I guess, a very long time, and I was hired out of the classroom to be an education manager with Make Music. And so together with Giovanna, we put together e-learning, the clinics, the conventions, and try to listen to educators so we can reflect back the things that are most pertinent to learn. My role tonight will be offline or off view, and I'll be trying to answer questions if they come up. And I'm just going to send a little note out to everybody in the chat window that if you do have a question, send it to Lee Kalstad in the chat window, or as you can see on the screen there. If it's a little more involved, or if I can't answer it during this session, because a lot goes on, then we'll do it as an email. Send that to training@makemusic.com, and then we'll get on that and do our best to get an answer by end of day tomorrow. So with that, Giovanna, it's all yours.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Lee. Okay, so it's the end of the school year, and you all probably have a process for closing out all of those tasks that you need to do. You have to turn in your grades. You probably have to do inventory if you haven't already. You have to figure out what your ensembles are going to be like for next year. And depending on the size of your program, you may have numerous ensembles with different levels of ability. You're going to have to figure out how to staff each of the groups in the upcoming year. Maybe you have a beginning group, an intermediate group, and an advanced group. You may have students that are graduating, others that maybe are moving. You may have one or two students that are dropping, unfortunately. I know that happens to everyone. And so you have to decide, how am I going to conform my ensembles for next year? And what criteria am I going to use for moving on students to the next level? In some cases, you may have been doing a year-long assessment process where in your mind you already know who goes in what ensemble based on what you have seen year-round. Or maybe you have an audition process, and depending on the results of that one process, you decide who goes where. You may or may not be looking at leadership qualities for staffing your ensembles. You may also take into account how responsible your students are. If you have a varsity ensemble, you may want the most responsible students in that ensemble, and those that show room for growth in terms of responsibility maybe don't belong there. So I know that you're thinking about all of those criteria, or maybe you do a combination of all of those things that we have discussed. In addition, how do you communicate what criteria you use to move students from one ensemble to another? Do you tell your students ahead of time? Are your parents aware of how it works? Are the administrators aware of how it works? How is all of that communicated? So we're going to talk a little bit about that, focusing specifically on auditions. So what may be some of the reasons why you may want to do auditions? You may want to keep your students accountable at the end of the year, right? We all know how as we reach the months of April and May, people start running out of steam. And we want to make sure that students are keeping up their skills and that they're still working in your classroom. So maybe having an audition and giving them a specific goal to work towards is something that will keep them engaged. You may want to do an audition as a summative evaluation. You know, after I've taught you all of these skills, here's this one piece that puts them all into action, and I want to see how you do. in a short amount of time, and how you put all of those skills together. You may also want to do an audition because you want to have a record of how your students play at the end of the year. Another reason to have an audition could be to level the playing field for all students. If you have different levels, for example, I used to have an orchestra for 9th graders, regardless of the level that they came playing at, just because they came from 4 or 5 different middle schools. So I wanted to level the playing field there. But once they finished their 9th grade, they were either going to go into my non-varsity or my varsity ensemble. And I wanted everybody to be able to play the same thing, or rather I wanted to hear everybody playing the same thing so that I could better judge who was going to go where. So with an audition, you can level the playing field. It probably doesn't feel like it's level for the students if it's something that the 11th graders are going to play much better than the 9th graders, but at least it gives you something that everyone is going to play. Obviously, you may want to do auditions to assess the current level of ability. We kind of touched on that on the summative part of the evaluation. And so you have in there, one of the bullet points says Amanda's story. I had a student named Amanda who she spent her first 3 years of high school in the non-varsity ensemble. Well, freshman ensemble, and then the 10th and 11th grade in the non-varsity ensemble. And by her 11th grade, she was really excited about orchestra. She was elected an orchestra officer. She was very active, helping with orchestra activities and anything that we needed. She was there for all the concerts. And her friends, who along with her were going to be seniors the following year, most of them were moving on to the varsity ensemble. But this particular student, her skill level was not at the level as these other students. So we did an audition. And at the time, I didn't do the audition in SmartMusic, which is what I'm going to show you today, but I did record her audition. And so we played, and then the students were ranked and placed in their respective ensembles. And a few days after that, I got an email from the parent. And we all dread those emails, right? Why is my child not in the top ensemble if she is so dedicated and she has done everything that you requested of her, and she was an officer this year, and she's so helpful, and she loves music, and she can play the violin. She's been playing since 6th grade, yada, yada, yada. So I called her in and we talked about it, and I said, well, let's listen to how you played, because I had the recording. And so we sat down and I played the recording and she listened. And the moment that she started listening, I saw her sinking in her chair. And so we talked about it, and I asked her, what do you hear? And she talked about what she heard. And I said, okay, so now I want you to listen to this other recording. And I didn't say who the student was, obviously, but I played the recording of somebody who did make it into the advanced orchestra. And the minute she heard that other recording, the conversation was over, basically. She completely understood, and she knew what was happening and why she hadn't made it. So now at that point, because and this ties back to all the other criteria that you may want to take into account when you do auditions, at that point I said, okay, well, so you are going to be a senior, and yes, it is true that you have been really responsible this year and you have shown all this enthusiasm, and I understand it's your last year and you want to be with your friends as well, so let's do something. Take this etude and you're going to work on it over the summer, and you're going to play for me again at the start of the new year. And if you play to the standard, then I'll put you in the ensemble. And she said, okay. So she went home for summer and came back. She worked on it hard. I mean, it wasn't at the level of the other recording, but she had made noticeable improvement. And so we moved to, I moved her to the advanced ensemble. So what that helped me do, because at that time I didn't have a rubric, it was just a graded, it was a recording, and then I listened to it and I graded it based on my knowledge of music. I thought to myself, I need to have something more concrete so that when I do the same audition process next year, I actually have written criteria that are very clear for the students and that are very clear for myself, so that if a situation like this arises again, I not only have the recording, but I can also say, well, this is what I was looking at or for, and here's how you placed according to that. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So in what way can you audition? There's a couple of different ways, right? You can have your students audition in person, obviously, or you can have them do it online with SmartMusic. In the school where I used to work, the band program was really big, and they had a staff of 4 directors, and they have a bigger budget as well, and so they did their auditions in person. The advantages of doing it in person are that you can take care of everyone in the same day, or maybe the same week if one day is not enough. If you have multiple directors, maybe each director can be in charge of listening to a specific group of students per instrument, and then divide and conquer the workload. If the budget allows, maybe you can hire private teachers to be the judges of the audition. My husband is a private instructor, and at the high school where I used to work at, they would do an alternating year process where one year the directors would hear everybody, and then the following year they'd hire the private teachers to come in and listen to the auditions and place the students. So just yesterday was the day when he had to go in from 5 to 7, I think, to listen to all the horn players. If you're the only director of your ensemble, like it was the case for me, you may find it challenging to hear everyone in the same day or in the same week. So when Amanda auditioned, we were doing an in-person audition at school, and I had to figure out a way in which I could continue to teach while the kids were doing their audition, and then I had to listen to the recordings after school. And that proved to have a bunch of logistics issues as well. So one student was a monitor at the door, and then another kid was in charge of pressing the record button in the CD recorded, and then the other student was auditioning, and then they also had to write their student ID down in a piece of paper, and then somebody would inevitably make a mistake and have to scratch, and so I'd end up with I don't know how many pieces of paper and the recordings, and trying to match the track number to the student ID is a really long, challenging process. And inevitably, we could never take care of an entire class in an entire class period. So my auditions ended up taking like 3 weeks. Well, that's not fair to the kid that had to audition first, right? Because they did get ready on time, and then the one that auditioned last had 3 more weeks to get ready. So in thinking about that, I was already using SmartMusic. I figured, well, if I do so many assignments already and the kids are used to using SmartMusic for practicing, why don't I just simply use SmartMusic for my auditions as well? So that's what I did. If you're already using SmartMusic, you don't need any additional budget for doing your auditions this way. One of the advantages is that all the students have the same tools to practice, and they all have the same deadline. You can set up the deadline and say you have to submit no later than, and then not accept late submissions. And then you put the power back on the students' hands by allowing them to submit their auditions from home. That way they're the owners of their best take, so to speak. And also they can maybe reduce their nerves because they're at home, they're in their own environment, they're not being pressured by the person who has to audition behind them. You could also do this in a practice room if they have home subscriptions, or you have a practice room subscription at school. Anyway, just by allowing them to do it on their terms at home, you eliminate a lot of that stress. Obviously, you're gonna have to go back and listen to that, but at least you regain all of your rehearsal time because you're not having to take care of auditions in the classroom. So what did I do, or how did I do it? I selected 1 etude per instrument. Lucky me, I am a string player, so I only had to take care of 4 etudes. If you're a band director, you have far more instrument etudes to select. But you could also just simply select a piece of literature that you plan to work on for the next year that is already in SmartMusic. That's another way of doing it. And so I selected an etude and then I put it in Finale, and then I exported it to SmartMusic. And so let me go real quick and share my screen here so that you can see what that etude, what that file looks like. And share my screen. So I took part of an etude from Dot Sauer book, and with a text box I actually was able to put the instructions right there in the document, and then all I had to do was export it to SmartMusic. And I'm going to show you in a few minutes a little video with the process. Then I also created a rubric for evaluation. Remember the Amanda story? That first year I didn't have a rubric, I was just listening. The following year I was like, I do have to have a rubric. So created a rubric for evaluation. Here's an example of one, of the one that I actually used. I did not create it. I probably just looked for a rubric, music rubric on the internet, and adapted it a little bit. At the time I used Adobe Pro, I think it was, which allowed me to put this rubric, make it fillable and have formula so that it would calculate the scores right away. You don't even have to do that with SmartMusic. You can create your own rubric inside of SmartMusic, and I can show you a little bit of that as well. Then I gave clear instructions to the students in terms of expectations, what they needed to do and by when they needed to do it, and what was going to happen if they didn't do it by the deadline. And then I created videos of myself playing the cello and the bass, and then I asked our violin teacher at the time to record a couple videos of the violin and viola etudes. That didn't take long at all. I recorded them with my phone, and then I posted them on the class website, and they looked like something like this. So that's just a screenshot of me recording myself on cello and then on bass. Let me go back a couple of slides so that the students could see what it looked like when playing and could also hear what it was supposed to sound like. Then I sent the students home with their assignment on SmartMusic, and they went home and practiced, and when they were ready, before or on the deadline, they submitted their audition recording. And after everybody submitted, then I just had to find time during either my planning period or a little bit after school to listen to each one of them and grade it. So I graded their auditions using the rubric that I showed you a couple minutes ago, as well as the SmartMusic score, because as you probably know, the SmartMusic score only takes into account pitch and rhythm, and I wanted to evaluate other things as well. And then when that was done, when I was done using my rubric, I sorted the results to staff the orchestras. And that's basically how the process worked. So here's the rubric, like I said before, screenshots of the videos. And let me show you what that whole process looked like. So in here you're going to see from the Finale file through the importing into the new SmartMusic software. At the time I did this, I did it in classic SmartMusic, but it works beautifully in the new SmartMusic as well. So you're going to see all of that here. If you are used to using Finale, to make this work in the new SmartMusic, you export the file as a music XML file. So if you're a Sibelius user or a user of other notation software, you can still bring in your files into the new SmartMusic. So I put in my instructions there using a text box, and then I exported that. When you log into your new SmartMusic, you can scroll down to the bottom and say upload new content. So in here you just name your work, and then you drag and drop your file. It's a very easy process. SmartMusic recognizes the XML file and displays the notation on screen, and then you have to assign an instrument part there if it isn't automatically assigned. And it looks exactly the same as it did in Finale. So once that's done, then you can simply assign it. And so it shows where under the tile it says uploaded content. It's called audition piece, so it's the second one from the top. You can either open it and assign it from it being open, or you can directly click on the assign button. And then you type in your instructions, and here's where you build your rubric. So since this is just an example of how it works, the rubric doesn't look exactly like the one that I showed you. But in here you can assign points for the assessment grade. You can assign points for tone and for rhythm and add it all up. And then you get to see what the music looks like and the section that you're assigning. So you can assign the whole thing or just a portion of it. You can manipulate the tempo, make it slower or faster. You can change the speed. If you wanted to make it a sight reading assignment, you could, although, you know, if it's an audition, you probably want them to be prepared rather than have to sight read. And then you can assign it to all your students in all your classes. At the time I made this video, we only assigned it to one class, but you can assign it to multiple classes now. In the next portion of the video, what you're going to see is a student logging in to actually record their assignment and send it in. So they select their instrument, the music displays on screen. And like we said earlier, the student's going to have all the tools for practicing. They can slow down, they can speed up, they can hear what the pitches are supposed to sound like, and just practice as many times as necessary. So once the student is satisfied after they've practiced, you know, they have multiple takes there, they can decide which one is the best, the one that they want to submit. And they can either they can even add a note for the teacher there to read. So once that uploads, it goes directly to the teacher's gradebook. In the next section of the video, what you see is the teacher logging in again to see that submission. So in the gray bar at the top, the teacher clicks on gradebook, and they can see all of the submissions. The audition piece is the last one on the right. And when they open it, the teacher can see everything that the student did. The red and the green note assessment. They can hear the recording. And then they can grade it. And in the grading process, you're going to be able to see that the assessment grade comes in automatically. Now here where it says tone, because there's 4 dots in there, that's your rubric where you can build different levels of achievement. So as you click on the different bubbles, you can select at which level the student performed, and then assign the points accordingly. So once all of that is done, then you can, and I'm going to share my screen here and go to my Chrome. You can go to the gradebook, and in your class you can actually, here where it says export, you can take all those grades. The audition piece we're talking about is right here. We just saw it a minute ago. So it's right there with all the red and green notes and the assessment and everything. So we can take all the grades and export them into either an Excel or a CSV file. So if I say Excel and I click export, here's my file down here. And when you manipulate it a little bit to change things, I have 2 students, and then here are the assignments. So the audition piece would have been down here. Here's 96 points. You can take all of that data and then sort it. When I did it this way, like I said, I used classic SmartMusic, and I used a rubric that I created myself. And because I had Adobe Acrobat, there was a way in which I could send the results of the rubric directly to myself, and it came in this document. I don't remember how to do that anymore, but we did figure out, Lee and I, a couple days ago, that if you are a Google Documents user, you could create a rubric in a Google form. Okay, that would look like this. You can put the student's name and their instrument and their grade, and then you would have the printed rubric that had all of the descriptions to look at while you select the different achievement levels for the particular student. If you're familiar with Google Forms in any way, shape, or form, you know that once you hit the submit button, all that data directly goes to spreadsheet. So these are some sample students that took the audition, and you can see how they did on each individual criterion, and then what they did in the SmartMusic score, and then what their total score is as well. So that's another way in which you could use this process, especially if you're interested in knowing how they're doing in each individual criteria. Does that make sense? So I think that's all I wanted to share with everybody. We have, if you guys have questions, maybe we can open up the session for everybody to ask questions. Perhaps if you type them to Lee, it's a more organized way to participate. Let's see, let me unmute all and see if anyone has a question or wants to contribute. Any other ideas? Yes.
Can you hear me? Oh, cool. I've never done this before. You mentioned having the blind audition in your office. Is there a way that we can have a blind audition through SmartMusic?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when I did this process, like I said, I used the classic SmartMusic, which is the one that you see on the left. There's a way there to put in the student ID number, and then when you're sorting your gradebook, you can hide the name and just show the student ID. I don't think currently.
But when it comes into grade, because you listen to it, the name comes up. Is there a way to not have that name come up? Because I'm using the
in the web-based, I don't think we currently have a way to enter student ID number and not name. But that is something that we could pass on to the developers.
Because I thought that would be a great way to do it, because you're just sitting there, you just got a number or some random way to sort them.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Yes. Somebody asked here, will this webinar be available for us to view at a later date? Yes, we are recording the webinar right now, and we plan on putting it on YouTube for people to access at any time.
And then, Giovanna, this is Lee again. I believe in the thank you note email that comes out, then they would have a link to that posted webinar so others could look at the video if they wanted. And then maybe, I don't know, as long as we're kind of vamping here for some questions, usually people aren't too shy. There might be a question they could throw in. Do you want to just tell them a little bit about our Wednesday, our webinar concepts here. They're coming up the rest of this month.
Yes, let me address a question that popped up in the chat window first, and then we'll talk about the rest of the schedule. So somebody's asking, is there a way for more than one person to evaluate the audition? So I think that unless you log in as yourself and have that other person listen for you, that would be the way, I guess, if you wanted someone else to hear it when you do it in SmartMusic. Does that answer the question?
Yes, thank you.
No problem. Any other questions? Okay, so yes, we have started a webinar series this May, and this is the second one of 4 for the month of May. The first one was last week, and we did one on practice and turbocharging students' results, and that one's available on the SmartMusic YouTube channel as well. So if you're interested in practice techniques as explained and shared by Bob Phillips, you can check that video out. Then there's today, and then next week is a discussion, a Q&A on why switching to the new SmartMusic if you're a classic SmartMusic user, with both Lee and I. And then the week after that is new SmartMusic tips, a panel with current music educators like you. And then we'll come up with the schedule for some additional webinars in the month of June that will probably not be in the evening, but rather in the day, because maybe most of you will be out for summer break already. So we want to let you know that if you're currently a classic SmartMusic user, or if you're not a SmartMusic user at all, and you're interested in checking it out, if you go to our website, you can start for free with the Teach Free platform. And if you enter Streamline your auditions in the comment section of the form, you can get a 30-day full access trial. That means that you will have access to all the content available in SmartMusic. Additionally, we have e-learning courses. So if you want to learn in detail how to use the new SmartMusic, go to smartmusic.com/training to learn more. And you can enroll in those courses for free. They're self-paced. They're accessible on computers, tablets, and phones. And you can just learn it at your own pace. So, are there any other questions? Great. Well, once again, thank you so very much for taking time out of your busy day to be here with us this evening. You will get an invite for the next webinars. Yes. So after this webinar ends tomorrow or the next day, I think you're going to get a thank you email for attending. And I believe the schedule for the upcoming webinars will be included in there. So you can register if you're interested in them. Okay. Thank you again.